welcome. Thank you for attending today's webinar. My name is Kaylee. I'm part of the marketing team here at Fullscript, and I'm very excited to be hosting this webinar with the Society of Wellness today. If you haven't attended one of our webinars with the Society of Wellness Nutritional Systems in the past, they are a company that delivers online programs focused on functional nutrition, herbal therapy, practice techniques, and systems taught by an internationally renowned faculty. The system teaches practitioners and practices how to effectively follow a systematic interview style, report on findings, and carry out follow-up procedures, among many other things. But today, we are going to hear from Professor Carrie Bone. So Professor Bone is recognized internationally as a preeminent herbal practitioner, scientist, and academic with a reputation cemented by his significant contribution to excellence in education, research, and advocacy. Professor Bone's passionate commitment to product development, research, writing, education, and clinical practice positions him as a pioneer in the herbal industry. He's the founder of MediHerb. He's also authored 6 books. He's a contributor to over 100 articles on herbal therapy to peer-reviewed journals around the world, and has remained dedicated to his practice for over 35 years. But before we get into the presentation, I know people are just starting to join us, so I just want to remind everyone that this is being recorded, and everyone who registered will get access to the recording through their email, as well as it also lives on Fullscript's website at fullscript.com/webinar. So you can find the recording there, as well as any other resources we will have, as well. Any upcoming webinars are also there, so you can sign up for more Fullscript webinars. Also, you may have noticed this is a slightly different webinar as our past, as we will be hearing from a recording from Professor Bone as he is in Australia, and are unable to have a live Q&A this time. However, we are asking everyone to still submit their questions through your GoToWebinar dashboard, as we'll be collecting them all and sending them off to Professor Bone, where he can answer them, and we'll provide a kind of resource document with the follow-up, as well as on that landing page of all the answered questions. So we may not get to it today, but your questions will be answered, so please ask away throughout the presentation. So with that being said, I'm going to disappear and you'll hear from Professor Bone. And again, thank you for attending us today, and we hope you enjoy.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to my introductory presentation on functional herbal therapy and cancer prevention. As you can see, this course has been adapted from a much larger one that I have researched and developed that is available for you online. So it is my hope that this presentation will stimulate your interest to learn more about the course. It doesn't just cover cancer prevention, of course, it covers all aspects of cancer prevention and treatment. So cancer is a source of significant and growing mortality worldwide, and it's estimated there'll be around 20 million new cases a year by 2025. And when the first decade of the new millennium passed, without the expected revolution in the smart drugs in targeted cancer therapy, some prominent voices in the cancer research community called for a focus to shift the hunt from costly new drugs to prevention, a renewed focus, or perhaps even a different emphasis. But can we at present, on the limited information we have, offer meaningful advice to our patients about how they can use herbs to lower their risk of this terrible disease? Do we act now, or do we have to wait until we have absolute proof while people are dying? Addressing the prevention of cancer is a challenge that will reinforce your role as a truly holistic carer and add further to your community relevance and your clinical reach. But we shouldn't just randomly suggest a few herbs that look good from test tube experiments or even from epidemiological data. What I'm suggesting is that we should adopt a structured approach using an organizing principle that is now known as the hallmarks of cancer. This is an important cutting-edge research development that has powerful relevance to your recommendations for prevention. Together with other research insights, which I'll outline in this brief presentation, it means you can act now because we have enough, and above all, the treatments are harmless. So let's begin with our topics. 4 topics: an introduction, a brief one, to the hallmarks of cancer, the overview and context for cancer prevention. I will outline 10 key prevention strategies, not entirely based on the hallmarks of cancer, but certainly informed by them, and as mentioned in my introduction, informed by other research. And then we will round the evidence out, or the discussion out, with epidemiological studies, and I will present a short list of key herbs that I believe we can recommend right now for cancer prevention. So the hallmarks of cancer. It was in the year 2000 that Hanahan and Weinberg published their paper, The Hallmarks of Cancer, and it was seen to be a very defining moment in cancer research. And indeed, it's informed and to some extent driven this new approach to targeted cancer therapy. As you can see in their first paper on this topic, Hanahan and Weinberg suggested 6 cancer hallmarks. If we begin top left, evading apoptosis or normal programmed cell death, self-sufficiency in growth signals, so the cells are not reliant on other signals from other cells to maintain growing, and indeed an insensitivity to anti-growth signaling. Go down bottom left, sustained angiogenesis, because as tumors grow, they need a blood supply and they're capable of doing that. Limitless replicative potential. If you take normal body cells that are capable of division and you put them into a test tube and they'll divide and divide 5 or 6 generations, and then they'll stop dividing. And this is known as the Hayflick phenomenon. But for cancer cells, they will keep on going indefinitely in their capacity to divide and produce new generations. And a very critical one, number 6, tissue invasion and metastasis. Now, not all these properties are unique to cancer cells. It has been pointed out that benign tumors share most of these, except for tissue invasion and metastasis. And in terms of developing a strategy for cancer prevention, there is some useful information here, but it's not nearly as informative for developing strategies as Hanahan and Weinberg's second paper. But before I go on to that, you'll notice that they said, we foresee cancer research developing into a logical science where the complexities of the disease described in the lab and the clinic will become understood in terms of a small number of underlying principles. So the original 6 hallmarks, and then another 4, 2 of which they called emerging hallmarks. They're up the top, and another 2 which they called enabling characteristics. But in addition, there was an 11th factor, the tumor microenvironment. Now, if we look at the 5 factors or hallmarks from their second paper published in 2011, we can see that this is far more relevant to our understanding of how we might prevent the development and growth of cancer. So at the top left, deregulating cellular energetics. So this is known, of course, now as the Warburg effect, where cancer cells don't necessarily rely on an oxygen supply to generate ATP, and in fact, in many cases, prefer not to. Avoiding immune recognition and destruction is another very important hallmark that we can apply in a preventative context, as is tumor promoting inflammation and helping to reduce and resolve that, and indeed helping to maintain genomic stability and lower the risk of genetic mutations. So much more informative, but above all, there is this factor of the tumor microenvironment. Now, the tumor microenvironment is rather close to the naturopathic concept of terrain. And as someone said, it's ask not what the cancer is doing to you, ask what you are doing to the cancer. It was cancer researcher D.W. Smithers who famously wrote in the Lancet journal in 1962, cancer is no more a disease of cells than a traffic jam is a disease of cars. He was severely criticized for making this statement, but without understanding now of the tumor microenvironment, we realized that he was definitely onto something. And he later elaborated and said that cancer cells were a necessary condition for disease, but not a sufficient one. Now, if we look at how the cancer hallmarks can be sequenced roughly in time order for the development of a tumor, you see it starts at the top with genomic instability. So particularly at a younger age, if you're looking to prevent cancer in younger people, with a lifetime vision for reducing the risk of cancer, then that's probably an area where you need to focus. Two other important areas, as already mentioned, more to midlife and later life, reducing general inflammation in the body and having a very sharp, focused immune surveillance. And above all, throughout, from the beginning of any cancer prevention strategy through through all the decades of life, we need to be focusing on maintaining a healthy tumor microenvironment. Now, you see there's a phenomenon there called EMT, epithelial to mesenchymal transition, and that appears to enable especially angiogenesis and tissue invasion and metastasis. And as I'll show you later, EMT is encouraged by the cells in a tissue aging, cellular senescence. So I will reflect on that a bit later. So what's our overview for cancer prevention and what's our context? I think the first thing we should do is dismiss that cancer is all in your genes. DNA does definitely not spell destiny when it comes to cancer. And who is this for? Well, primarily, let's start with you, your friends, and your family, but obviously for those people who are in your healthcare as well, your patients, and especially those who want to take measures to ensure a long and healthy life, which is primary prevention. And you might particularly be able to help people who have a family history or genetic risk of specific cancers. But the strategies outlined here are also relevant to people who've recovered from cancer and want to take all relevant measures to avoid a relapse. And that's tertiary prevention. And also, you may have people come to you from time to time who are identified as being at risk from medical testing, or they may even have precancerous states like intestinal polyps. And in this case, we're applying these strategies for secondary prevention. So the strategies outlined here can be applied for primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. And the tertiary prevention, of course, is something we will see often in the clinic. Someone's had cancer therapy, they're in remission, and they want to remain so. So why are we doing this? Well, prevention is far easier than cure. And since cancer develops over decades, our context is that for primary prevention, we need to take herbs over decades. So for that reason, we should choose herbs that have other beneficial effects like maintaining well-being, supporting healthy immunity, down-regulating inflammation. That certainly all fits in with targeting the cancer hallmarks. And it also suggests that a lot of what we have to do is at the phytonutrient stage with maintaining these herbal influences via the diet, via the phytochemicals in the diet. And it's particularly relevant, for example, as I'll show you, for mushrooms, not just medicinal mushrooms, but dietary mushrooms. And of course, you can't go past a favorable diet from other considerations like macronutrients and so on, and micronutrients, as well as phytonutrients, and lifestyle measures are critically important too. And as Hanahan said, the approach when we're coming to prevention should be as multifactorial as possible. So one of the big questions we have to grapple with is there enough evidence now? Now, if you believe the FDA, for example, with green tea, there's not enough evidence now. But is that really a balanced approach to wait for absolutely equivocal evidence? And indeed, if you look at the World Cancer Research Fund, they have a strong statement on their website that there's no strong evidence that dietary supplements, apart from calcium for colorectal cancer, can reduce cancer risk. But I would suggest that herbs and supplements are the best candidates for any disease prevention program because they work in harmony with the body's physiology. They work at a functional level. The title of my talk and indeed my new book is Functional Herbal Therapy. And above all, they're safe when taken long-term. And it's going to take decades to generate high-level evidence. So I believe we need an approach that's constructed on the best available evidence and underpinned by biological plausibility, and especially what we know about cancer and its development and cancer cells. And of course, this is where the hallmarks come in particularly. So we can take a general overview and say we have 3 pillars for cancer prevention. Avoid cell damage, and that's especially at the genetic level. Repair it appropriately, again, especially at the genetic level. And above all, maintain a healthy tissue environment, which discourages cancer from growing. I mean, aberrant cells, they're bound to develop, but the steps that it takes to turn them into a tumor are very much determined by the tissue environment. So as I said, this is the naturopathic concept of terrain. And what we should do is deprive the cell of nutrients that corrupt its metabolism, signaling factors that encourage aberrant behavior, deprive the cell of the potential for escaping immune surveillance and ways of resisting apoptosis. And all of this is built into the 10 strategies that I'll be describing next. And we need to ensure conditions that an early tumor remains localized and doesn't metastasize, is discouraged from growing, and it's even possible that it could be encouraged to revert to back to normal cells. So you see from this, the examples there, cervix, breast, colon, prostate, you're looking at decades. So cancer development takes time, and you have, before you get an actual carcinoma in situ with the purple arrows and an invasive cancer, you see the yellow arrows, you get various dysplastic states. Now, dysplasia is definitely a reversible condition. Cancer mutations are not simply a series of isolated targets. Beneath the surface of the cancer genome is a notably complex cellular signaling network filled with redundancies. And so the elucidation of rational preventative combinations requires dynamic mechanistic models that reach beyond simple targeting of one thing or another. And that is a quote from the Halifax Project. If you haven't heard of the Halifax Project, it's covered in my course. And what it means is that we need, for natural treatments for cancer prevention, for herbs in particular, we need to take a very broad-based approach over this long time frame, rather than just focusing on one thing or another. Now, I mentioned cancers can regress or slow. Around 10% of invasive breast cancers are not symptomatic during life. And 1/5 of breast cancer patients, if left untreated, will be alive after 5 years, and about 1 in 10 screen-detected breast cancers may regress. And the quote is that the natural course of many of screen-detected invasive breast cancers is just to spontaneously regress. Up to 50% of primary malignant melanoma is reported to undergo spontaneous regression. And there's the references for those studies. So as mentioned, I'm going to talk about 10 prevention strategies, and drawing from the Halifax Project, that we need a multifactorial approach that is targeted as many cancer hallmarks as possible, and all the other factors, and especially looking at terrain. So here are the 10 key strategies that I have developed based on my research in this field. They're guided by an understanding of the process of tumorigenesis, the cancer hallmarks, the enabling characteristics and of the tumor microenvironment and its general importance, the cellular hallmarks of aging, which I will discuss, and issues such as epithelial to mesenchymal transition, and most importantly, of course, a consideration of the relevant properties of plants in the context of these, taking a realistic approach and not giving too much credibility to test tube research. So that's how the 10 key strategies have been developed. And particularly, as I mentioned, take into account the interaction of herbs with the known cellular corrective pathways and the cellular protective pathways. So what are they? Obviously, lowering inflammation, improving immune surveillance, lowering oxidative stress, improving detoxification, and both of those can be achieved in a targeted way, as I'll outline, by upregulating NRF2 or NRF2, some people say, responses. There's the NRF2 ARE pathway, maintaining a healthy microbiome, lowering insulin resistance, and lowering related growth factors such as insulin-like growth factor 1, and that definitely reflects on metabolism. Now you see of number 2 and 3 are green because I am going to elaborate on those. The other ones in black I won't have time to elaborate now, but they are in my course. And if we move on to the next 5, thinner blood, healthy vascular endothelial responses and improved tissue perfusion, healthy methylation and epigenetic and genomic stability, maximizing ketosis and mitochondrial therapy. And one of the things that I believe is very beneficial in cancer therapy and can be applied also for short time periods here and there for prevention is a vegan ketogenic diet. But there's more on that in my course, and one of my students has now written a vegan ketogenic cookbook, which should be coming out soon. And her name is Nina Gudkovs, Gudkovs. Encourage a tissue state that's hostile to tumor growth and delay cellular aging. So those 3 in green will be what I will elaborate now. So enhancing immune responses, that is the strength of herbs. And especially if we look at the medicinal mushrooms, you see, and mushrooms in general, they contain beta-glucans, and you see they have upregulating effects on many immune cells, neutrophils, macrophages, natural killer cells, and dendritic cells in particular. So here's what happens. We get a fungal infection, and the cells in our innate immune response, and in this case, the main cell we're looking at here is a dendritic cell or a macrophage, part of immune surveillance. And as you can see, it recognizes the fungi via the beta-glucans and via a range of receptors, but in particular, an important one is the dectin-1 receptor. Now, fascinating that is, if you look over to the right, is that the dectin-1 receptor also recognizes tumor cells. And if you look further into the mechanisms, you see IRF5 is upregulated in both cases, and that then, for example, stimulates natural killer cells. And you either get an antifungal response or you get primed natural killer cells tumor killing. So putting it in plain language, when you consume fungi in your diet, it upregulates your innate immune responses because your body thinks that you have a fungal infection. But the pathways that get upregulated are the very same ones that also upregulate natural killer cell immune surveillance. Therefore, it follows, and the natural killer cells, of course, your natural born killers. Therefore, it follows that mushrooms consumed regularly in the diet that contain beta-glucans, or indeed given therapeutically as extracts, should improve your surveillance against cancer cells, and especially in the context of prevention, help prevent cancers. Now, there is an interesting factor here that's been identified from the research, and that is that these dectin-1 receptors react to the beta-glucans, especially if they're in the context of some fragments of the cell wall. So it's the two together particularly stimulates them. And therefore, that means that especially dietary mushrooms of fruiting bodies should be very good at activating immune surveillance. And especially if you fragment up those cells, like, for example, what I do is make a mushroom soup, then they're very readily designed that way to then stimulate your dectin-1 receptors on your dendritic cells. But it's not just the dectin-1 receptors. The larger beta-glucans are processed by macrophages and dendritic cells to smaller moieties that prime, for example, complement receptor 3 on neutrophils and natural killer cells. So you get an enhancement of immune surveillance that way as well. Now, this is really important because tumors are known to have mechanisms that help them escape the immune system. In fact, it's almost like they're forced to lose specific features in order to survive immune attack. And a classical example of this is the loss of tumor or HLA class 1 antigens that renders cancer cells completely invisible to T lymphocytes. But a cell that loses its HLA class 1 antigens, it actually becomes more susceptible to natural killer cell killing. And that's why anything that enhances NK cell tumor surveillance as per mushrooms is important. Now, there's another herb I'd like to discuss in that context, and that's Echinacea. And especially we're talking here about the root of Echinacea purpurea and Echinacea angustifolia. In a rather extraordinarily entitled paper, Canadian scientist Sandra Miller proposed that Echinacea, with a question mark, Echinacea, a miracle herb against aging and cancer. And when in her lab, they fed healthy young adult mice Echinacea purpurea root, it stimulated natural killer cell production in the bone marrow in the first 7 days and resulted in significantly higher levels, around 25% more after 2 weeks. So the regular use of Echinacea stimulated that natural killer cell production. In other studies in old mice, her labs showed that it rejuvenated the function and activity of natural killer cells and numbers to what you see more in younger mice. And then there was an experiment where the mice were fed Echinacea purpurea root for most of their life, and lifespan was significantly extended compared to controls, mainly because those mice fed the Echinacea developed fewer cancers. So it's my second herb for immune surveillance, and some of you who know me will know that I take Echinacea root every day, and it's getting on to, well, it's probably 25 years now, maybe longer, that I've been doing that. So other key immune herbs for cancer prevention should be no surprise: astragalus, other mushrooms, or specifically medicinal mushrooms, Ganoderma, shiitake, cat's claw, and there's some good data for aged garlic extract as well. So the next strategy, number 2 of the 3 that I will discuss out of the 10, is managing oxidative stress and detoxification. And here we need to select herbs that upregulate the KEAP1 NRF2 ARE pathway. This is a primordial fundamental pathway, a target approach to antioxidant protection in the human cell. It's the key cytoprotective or cellular protective pathway in the body, and it's dynamic. It's induced by oxidative or chemical stress on the cell, by what we can call electrophiles, and certainly in the context of the last decade or so, it's fundamentally new and novel. Its key advantage is it's a switch on, switch off mechanism, and it's mainly primed by natural plant chemicals. So if we look at this, so we can describe the NRF2 ARE pathway, and it does more than just antioxidation, by the way. It's a whole range of cellular protective responses are induced by this pathway. But if we look at just the antioxidant discussion, we can define activating the NRF2 ARE pathway as biological antioxidation, whereas applying things that might, for example, show antioxidant activity in an ORAC test, which is a passive thing, we can describe that as just purely chemical antioxidation. So biological antioxidation occurs inside the cell, but if you're trying to do chemical antioxidation with herbs, there's uncertain access to the cell because of all these barriers. Biological antioxidant is completely compatible and indeed draws on cell physiology, whereas chemical antioxidation may interfere with cell physiology. It's biological is only activated when needed, whereas with chemical antioxidation, you get a passive blanket effect. And above all, biological antioxidation is enzymatic, and so it's constantly renewed, whereas chemical antioxidation can be readily depleted. Case in point, 1 molecule of ascorbic acid can quench 1 free radical. 1 molecule of superoxide dismutase, which is induced by the NRF2 ARE pathway, can quench billions of free radicals per second. So some writers have said that in the context of especially cancer prevention, but general health, that NRF2 may well become the most extraordinary therapeutic and most extraordinary preventative breakthrough in the history of medicine. And it's known that NRF2 activating nutrients, especially herbs, I should say phytonutrients, prevent cancer in countless experimental models. For example, multiple lines of evidence suggest that carnosol from rosemary holds the promise of preventing certain types of cancer. Now, NRF2 is a sensitive cellular mechanism, so it's readily triggered under test tube conditions. But if we want those in vitro results to translate to in vivo, we need to consider issues like metabolism, barriers, concentrations, dosage issues. And for that reason, the best candidates to choose are ones that already have known chemoprevention and detoxifying activity from oral doses in experimental models, or even we can go to the next point and say, or have shown such activity in clinical trials, or at the very least good human bioavailability. So based on that, this is my priority list. So it's and you've got the herb first and the key phytochemical or phytonutrient second. So broccoli sprouts with sulforaphane, turmeric with curcumin, rosemary with carnosol and carnosic acid, green tea with EGCG, polygonum, it's also known as fallopian or raynautria or Japanese knotweed, providing resveratrol. And then we're not really sure what the phytonutrients or phytochemicals are in garlic and ginkgo. Garlic, definitely the sulfur ones, of course, but they round out my priority list. Although I will be mentioning Korean ginseng, it has been shown to have activity that's, I believe, clinically relevant in terms of NRF2. Then the final of the 10 strategies that I want to just elaborate on is delaying cellular aging. So you see, particularly up here in the top left, when a tissue accumulates senescent cells, you enhance epithelial to mesenchymal transition. So if we keep our tissues as young as possible, and this is possibly one of the key reasons why cancer risk, and particularly metastatic cancer risk, goes up with aging. But you see also you've got phenomena like immunosenescence, changes in autophagy capacity, dysbiosis and gut barrier dysfunction, stem cell impairment, inflammation, and genetic changes. So all of those are relevant. And some researchers believe that changes in autophagy is also is like the encouragement of EMT in senescent tissues is a main reason why aging is relevant to cancer. Now we have the 9 hallmarks of cellular aging, and this helps inform our cellular targets, although I believe some don't need to be directly addressed. So telomere length, trying to manipulate telomere length is potentially dangerous because the mechanisms used to promote telomere length are exploited by cancer cells for their immortality. So if you get everything else right, telomere length will be preserved. But I'm not one of these people who believes that we should be giving natural agents to target enhancing telomere length directly by interacting with telomerase or other such enzymatic systems. Deregulated nutrient sensing, mitochondrial dysfunction, as you can see, they definitely tie in with the 10 targets and the hallmarks of aging, as do most of these other cellular hallmarks of aging. So the question then arises, well, flip it round, what can we do to ensure healthy cellular aging? And mitochondrial function and energy regulation, I believe, is critical. For example, things that upregulate AMPK and downregulate mTOR. Microcirculation, having a healthy microcirculation that nourishes at a cellular level. Improving or optimizing our biosynthetic and repair machinery, and especially healthy methylation and healthy mitochondria, and cellular protection. The key one there is NRF2, but you see sirtuins, heat shock proteins, and targeted antioxidant protection for mitochondria come in. So what am I talking about here with targeted antioxidant protection for mitochondria? I'm actually talking about melatonin, and a full discussion of that is in the course. And then resolution of inflammation in the body needs to happen. And just a final point on this topic, if we just look at one key aspect and longevity, this is a study that's done in short-lived versus long-lived species in the same genus. It might be rats or bats or what have you. And you see that total NRF2 levels are correlated with longevity, but also, as you can see, total keep levels being down, which means NRF2 is more sensitive because keep inhibits NRF2 responses. NRF2 binding nuclear activity is up, which means you get more effective translation from that nuclear transcription factor, and then increased transcription of the key downstream targets like these phase 2 enzymes, for example, is up. So we do have that evidence, at least in terms of longevity and therefore healthy cellular aging, that NRF2 is important. So epidemiological studies, we can use those to round out the evidence. So there are studies linking herbs or diet to lower cancer incidence is what I'll briefly review here. So plenty of data from meta-analyses on green tea, despite the negative Cochrane and the negative approach of the FDA. The cabbage family, the brassicas, cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kale, and so on. Colon, gastric, breast, and prostate, so especially the hormonal cancers. Also one on bladder cancer survival for the brassicas. Meta-analysis of mushrooms and breast cancer, and a single study, mushrooms and ovarian cancer. I'm going to do more because on mushrooms, because there's a recent study I'll mention soon. They're the references. And if we look at some other examples, ginkgo has been linked to lower ovarian cancer incidence, regular intake of ginkgo. And if we look at some key phytochemicals, anthocyanins that are in the berries and flavonoids that are in a range of foods, onions, apples, and so on, have also shown reduced cancer incidence versus higher intake of these phytonutrients. So here's the mushroom study, and as you can see, it's just been published in 2021, and it was a meta-analysis of a large number of studies. And if you look at the combined effect, you see there is a substantial, where one is no change in risk, and that's about 0.65. So it's about 35.66. There it is. There's a 34% reduction in the risk of cancer, a range of cancers, but particularly again breast cancer from this study. And the beauty of it was it showed dose dependency. So the more mushrooms you had, the lower your relative risks of contracting cancer. And the quantities don't need to be that high. You see an average of 20 grams per day fresh weight of dietary mushrooms is sufficient. And with my mushroom soup, I'm probably having 50 to 60 grams a day of finely ground up or mixed, blended up mushrooms, which are far more likely to activate those dectin-1 receptors. So based on the data we know for herbs and the 10 targets and the hallmarks of cancer, I have 7 key herbs. I'll call them perfect herbs, but the 7 key herbs that I believe are relevant to focus on for cancer prevention. And they're things that people can have every day as for general health as part of their diet in many cases. So Korean ginseng, turmeric, green tea, ginkgo, garlic, rosemary, and the resveratrol. And I would take nearly all of these on a daily basis. Rosemary is probably the only point where I'm a bit remiss and I need to work on it, but all the others I do indeed take on a daily basis. And we can connect the dots. So here I'm talking about specifically linking between preclinical studies identify key points of intervention as per the 10 factors, epidemiological studies showing a protective effect on cancer incidence, and even clinical trials for cancer prevention in either healthy or pre-cancerous people. All of this exists for green tea, but unfortunately, it doesn't exist much for turmeric because we're lacking in India. They don't seem to have done that many epidemiological studies on turmeric, so we're lacking there. But I've chosen as an example because it is a very strong one, the example of Korean ginseng. Multiple experimental models suggest that Korean ginseng can address critical factors involved in the expression of the hallmarks of cancer. And in terms of 8 out of the 10 strategies, you see the data there for Korean ginseng. And in bracket C means it's clinical data. In bracket C, it's an experimental model. But you see it lowers inflammation, improves immune status, boosts NRF2, boosts detoxification, lowers insulin responses, and that's the signaling factors, improves genetic stability. Now, genomic stability is critical, and I haven't included that. So I'll just say briefly here, the best data we have for herbs that improve genomic stability is for Korean ginseng, green tea, and ginkgo. And they're on my 7 perfect herb list. And also from a dietary perspective, it's the brassicas, it's the cabbage family. They seem to help preserve genomic or genetic stability. Ginseng can improve endothelial responses, mitochondrial function, and it's anti-senescent. But it's even more than that, because it's been used as part of successful traditional approaches for patients with cancer. It showed improved outcomes in gastric cancer patients when given with conventional therapy. And because Korean ginseng is consumed widely in Korea, they were being able to do epidemiological studies, and they found that Korean ginseng, in a meta-analysis of 9 studies done in 2016, is associated with profound reductions in the risk of cancer. And it's not organ specific, it seems to be across the board. And then there's one clinical trial where Korean ginseng reduced cancer development in at-risk patients. So another one of my perfect herbs, of course, is turmeric or curcumin, and you see curcumin has a number of key properties. It helps decrease adhesion and cell surface molecules that are involved in that, and thereby lowers risk of metastasis. It helps to decrease extracellular matrix degradation. Again, that's going to lower risk of metastasis, but also help resolve inflammation. MMPs, that's matrix metalloproteinases, are involved there. And there are various reasons why it seems to have anti-angiogenic properties as well. But these are test tube research, and many of it, and to translate that into clinical reality, you need a highly bioavailable form of curcumin to do that. And final point, I mentioned about rosemary. It's one of my 7 perfect herbs, and there's this phenomenon of this village in Italy where 81 of 700 people living there at the time of this report are 100 years old. And the authors who studied it believe that the key to this is the large amount of rosemary they have in their daily diet. So thank you very much. And certainly if you're interested in more information, it's all in my course. And I hope that this snapshot of some of the material in the course does stimulate you to look further at the course. You know, I sincerely want as many people to get the benefit from all that work and research I did as possible.
All right, thank you. I'm going to give everyone a couple more minutes to get some questions in. As a reminder, we don't have a live Q&A this evening or afternoon, morning, wherever you are today, but we do have the option to include your question into your dashboard. We can pull a report, and we're going to get Professor Carrie Bone to answer the questions that came in, and we'll provide that with the follow-up recording, any other resources we can, as soon as we can. I want to also mention in the chat, if you missed it, that there are some links to Professor Bone's course, as well as a discount code. I believe it's FS200 for $200 off. We'll also include that and any details we can in a follow-up email to all registrants. So if you had to leave early, you have to leave now, go ahead. You will get a recording, and you can also find it on Fullscript's website at fullscript.com/webinars. I want to thank everyone for being here today with a great webinar, great topic, and a lot of questions came through and a lot of engagement. So we love seeing that here at Fullscript, and we hope you found just as valuable as we did. There, again, check your email as soon as you can, and the website, we will get it off to you. And any other questions, you can reach out to webinars@fullscript.com. And we hope that we get to see you again in the future. So any more questions, I'll give you a couple more seconds to get in there. And hopefully we can get these answers back to you. And we hope that everyone has a great rest of the day wherever you are. And again, we hope to see you soon. All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.